Hi everyone and welcome to my video. Today I want to talk about wargaming terrain and especially why I design terrain the way I do and what makes terrain good, what makes terrain bad, and what decisions I did and why I did those decisions, always with a focus on playability, but also making it look nice. Because in my opinion, terrain has to look nice. A tabletop wargaming table has to look awesome, so it makes much more fun. But on the other hand, the terrain rules have to be very clear, and it shouldn't be like there shouldn't be big problems during every step in the game where you have to look at line of sights and then decide, can unit A shoot at unit B or can they not shoot, and so on. And let's probably start with this. So this is like a very standard ruin, the classical L-shaped ruins, and I like them, how they look. I think they are basically a standard for tabletop wargaming, but I think they have some flaws. And one of the biggest flaws for me is, when do we get cover and when don't we get cover? So in this case, our line of sight roughly passes here at the edge of the ruin, but this means depending on where this unit is, we can move to another position, and here we have cover, here we don't have cover, or even if we do true line of sight and like we have it here, a bigger pillar, then we won't be able to see through that. And this makes it very complicated to really determine line of sight. Of course, you can always go down to eye level of the miniature and then look, but then sometimes some parts of the minis are visible, and depending on where you move your head, some parts aren't. And one of the biggest decisions, and I would also say very elemental decision I took, is to not do single terrain pieces, like here this ruin, or for example just a simple barricade, but to switch over to area terrain. This means every type of terrain we have always has a footprint. And in our case, let's say this is a ruin. So no matter where our model here is, the model will get cover. And then of course we can make a nice ruin, just put some nice pots on there. Maybe like this. And then we don't have to really look, can the model see the other model? Just know we have a line of sight and we can shoot, but we will get cover. And we will also get cover in this case. So this is an abstraction, of course, but in reality, wargaming isn't as static as it is on the tabletop. All those units are actually moving around all the time, and so maybe it's something like this, and we will get cover. So what does it mean for this type of terrain? So no matter where I am inside here, I will get cover, and anyone on the outside has just to measure the distance and directly knows, okay, the unit gets cover. In this case, I decided to follow the one-page rules definition of forests, which means you can look into the terrain, you can look out of the terrain, but you cannot look completely through. So this line of sight is blocked, this line of sight is cover, and this line of sight is free. Of course, again, this creates some funny situations. In this case, we get cover. And now let's just think about this case. In this case, we cannot shoot at all because we have the outline of the ruin going over here, completely blocking the line of sight. And yeah, I know this is a bit unintuitive, but in my opinion, this is necessary to allow a really, really good game flow. And especially thinking about tournaments. So I've been the organizer for several one-page rules tournaments in Grimloud Future, and you don't have much time there. Of course, you want to have a game in 2 hours. We have 3,000 points, so something 10 up to 15 activations. It needs to be fast and it needs to be clear. So I don't want any time we have situations like this to call a judge and then ask the judge, okay, is this cover? Isn't this cover? And so it's clearly defined that unit is inside our terrain piece that grants cover, so it's covered. And for movement, I decided to make the walls impassable. So this means the unit has to move outside here, cannot just jump over that. But when measuring, you can actually do that quite easily. And I think that gives some tactical advantage if you're like down here against melee units from here. They have to run around, giving you a small advantage here. And that's it basically for my ruins. So my rules for ruins are anything inside gets cover and the walls are impassable. So you need to run around the walls. We usually have the openings on two sides here and you cannot look completely through. So this line of sight is blocked. And very important here, we have a flat surface here so we can put our units anywhere here. So it's not like we have a wall where we can stand here or here, but not somewhere up here. So the movement has to be interrupted. And as you know, my designs, I have several different styles. These are now Eternal Dynasty models. So let's just do the exact same with my Asian styled terrain. And you see, it's exactly the same rules. We have our walls here. We cannot move through here. We can move through this opening. We get cover as soon as we're inside. And we have a blocked line of sight if we trace the line of sight completely through the terrain. My suggestion is to have two of these big ruins, so 9 by 6 inches, and then two of the smaller ruins, 6 by 9 inches. So that's already 6 terrain pieces, granting cover and also restricting movement a bit. The next terrain piece I think every wargaming table should have is a forest. And it doesn't have to be the classical wood forest. So in this case for Asian table we have cherry trees, but you can also do normal trees like with green leaves or just rotten trees as we have it up here. You can do cacti, you can do big stones, like for my dwarf terrain, I guess you know it. And basically here the rules are exactly the same. Inside, cover, behind, blocked, and this is just a free line of sight. Forest additionally gives difficult terrain, so movement is a bit harder in the forest. But very important, the trees must be movable, because if this tree now is fixed here, I just cannot move my model in here. So I can just put the tree away, move the model inside, maybe put the tree then here. So again, it's an abstraction of how the terrain works, but it's for playability. And you can also put magnets below them, which makes the trees stand better, because they sometimes, you see, they tip over quite easily. But yeah, make sure it's very flat so you can put units on it. Later on I will talk about the cover terrain and why I would not include it in my standard definition. So we started with 6 ruins. I would suggest to have 2 forests in every standard terrain set, 9 by 9 inches. So just use an MDF plate as a base. But you see, trees can fall over. Maybe magnets would have been good here. Just use an MDF wood plate for the base, and then just put some sand, some small rocks, and then you can of course print the trees, print stones, whatever you like. Alright, so these are the first 8 terrain pieces, and the next terrain piece I would suggest is dangerous terrain, just to add some danger, some thrill. And this is one of the variants I have here. You see, you can just move over here. Maybe it's a bit bad with the barrels, so you sometimes have to find a good place to put your miniature on. But if you have larger minis, they usually can just stand like this or even on top. That should be fine. I would say this is a corner case. Maybe it would be better if we could remove the barrels, but then of course it will again not look that good. So I decided to go for this. And yeah, I would say every table should have at least 2 pieces here, 6 by 9 inches. And yeah, that's already the standard definition of terrain for me. So these 10 pieces have to be there all the time. And of course you can do different styles. So for dangerous terrain, you can also have your base plate, of course, nicely painted. And then you could add stuff like minefields or also barbed wire. And again here, it's just the area. So if I move here through that terrain, I have to do the dangerous terrain test, or if I move inside, and it doesn't really matter where are the mines, and you can move everything around, so it's really playable and you don't have to take care that much. Yeah, so that's my basic definition of terrain for wargaming, and I now want to present more pieces I would add. So this is really the bare minimum, these 10 pieces. I would at least suggest to have 2 additional containers, like 3 by 6 inches. You can do stacks easily, but I would suggest to have 2 of these pieces too, and they just block everything. You cannot move through them, you cannot look through them, and you cannot stand on top. In general, I would suggest to keep terrain on the ground floor and not start with higher levels like you have here, because then what happens? Can they see each other? Can they see each other now? So how do we trace a proper line of sight here? Because we don't really want to do true line of sight. That's just open for discussion and it's not suitable for tournaments in my opinion. That's why in my definition everything should be on the ground. And I don't think going up to higher levels adds a nice piece of complexity to the game. It just adds more exploits. So you can, for example, park infantry units on top, and then you have larger vehicles that cannot attack them at all, like a melee walker or something. And that's just, in my opinion, unnecessary. And you have a lot of extra movement up there, and it doesn't really add much to the game. We played with and without, and having height included was just a frustration factor. So we decided to just keep it out completely. So that's why in this case we can just have 1 container, because it blocks line of sight anyway. We can do a stack if it looks nicer, but we don't really need to do that. I would suggest to have at least 2 of these to make it 12 pieces, but we could also go up to 4 of each, and in my opinion you should. So that's 14 pieces. So we have ruins, we have forests, dangerous, and these blockers. And now the last part of my regular terrain suggestion would be difficult terrain. And for difficult terrain, you can make it really easy. Just print some tank traps, put them on a base, that's it. You can move them around when you move your models here. You can also print rubble piles like this, or craters, anything. Just make sure you have a nice footprint, so you know if you move here, it's a normal movement, and if you move here, you have difficult terrain. And in my opinion, you should have quite some difficult terrain, because in the standard definition, we only have the forest, so that's 2 pieces. And now with this, we have 2 additional ones. So I would again say, have 2 of them, 9 by 6 inches, and make it difficult, because then units with flying or units with strider in one-page rules just make more sense. And also then, I would say terrain can increase the tactical depth of the game a lot, because then it's not just you have 2 armies running against each other and shooting on everything, but we have to interact with the terrain. We have to look for cover, move around stuff, can decide whether we move here or move around, but then it's a larger distance. I think it adds a lot to the game. And yeah, that's my definition of the ideal tabletop wargaming terrain. Make sure it's area terrain, so you instantly know whether it has an effect or not, and not use stuff like true line of sight. The great thing about area terrain is you don't really need to model it that exactly. You can just move stuff around, your units can move through it, and that makes it much more convenient for gaming. And I think this gaming experience is very, very important, because if you don't have a proper gaming experience, you don't really need all that nice terrain, because if the game isn't funny anymore, you don't need to play it. The last terrain piece I want to talk about is cover terrain. And you can think about stuff like, for example, just sandbags. These aren't painted yet, but you could also do like an emplacement here with some barricades like this. And I would always suggest to have a fully closed one like here. For example, let's just take some tank traps. And again, it's area terrain, so everything inside these 6 by 6 inches counts as being in cover. So in this case, cover, no cover. My proposal for that would be to only make it for infantry, or probably couple it to the height values of units depending on their tough value. So this one will not get cover because you see most of it, but in this case you will get cover. And I would also say it's only inside. So if you're behind, you just don't get cover at all, and that's it. But I didn't include this in my standard definition of terrain, and my problem with that is you have a very high border all around the terrain. So this means let's just take this example, if I'm here, let's do it this way, and my unit could move like up to here, will not be able to do base contact without the model tipping over. So we have to stand outside here or move all around up to here, which technically means we cannot charge that unit, because we cannot probably put it in there. Let's just take some more models, and let's assume this would be one squad. So how would you charge this squad? Let's say you're here. You cannot move completely around because you're too far away. Realistically, you could just run there and fight them in melee, but you are not able to properly balance this model anywhere to get into charge distance. And that's why I removed this part from my standard terrain definition and said, yeah, it would be nice to give some extra cover, but in the end we have the blockers, and then 6 ruins plus 2 forests. That's 50% of the terrain granting cover, and those are the larger pieces. So you have around 60% of the area you have with terrain is cover, so that should be sufficient. And yeah, that's why I removed this from my definition and just included the other 16 pieces. You probably already know my terrain tool. I have this terrain definition in there as Udo's OPR terrain, and that's all the pieces I just proposed in the suitable colors. So I have red for dangerous terrain, obviously, green for difficult terrain, and the ruins have the gray basic area and yellow outline for the walls. And yeah, we have this blue greenish thing for forests and black for blockers. I will link my terrain tool, and you can just jump in there, define your battlefield, define your terrain pieces, whatever you have, and let the tool create layouts for you. And yeah, that's my suggestion for basically wargaming terrain for usually one-page rules, so Age of Fantasy, Grimdark Future, but also for the skirmishers. There you might even include these cover terrains, or even more. They are on a smaller battlefield, but of course they need much more terrain. So in my opinion, if you take these 16 pieces, you should be fine. That should give you a really nice and covered table. And I have lots of terrain pieces available on Cults, everything for free, or on the other platforms, of course. So you can just put together your table how you like it. If you wanted sci-fi or fantasy, so in this case, for example, this Asian terrain, in my opinion, is perfectly suitable for fantasy and sci-fi. The containers, of course, are not suitable for fantasy. My idea is there to have just small houses with the same size. That should be fine. And yeah, forest is the same. Dangerous terrain, I'm thinking about dangerous animals here, for example. And for the difficult terrain, especially for this Asian styled, you could, for example, use rice fields in fantasy, or let's call it the absolute classic difficult terrain anyone can have. Just an old doormat cut out to fit the 6x9 inch, and you can put your models on there easily. Works perfectly fine and is super easy to create. So it takes like 5 minutes to cut it out and you have 2 finished terrain pieces. Yeah, that's my philosophy for terrain. That's what I would suggest for everyone for their wargaming table. Again, you can find all terrain designs you need for that on all the pages I'm on. So just download them, print them, and you have your wargaming table. Use my terrain tool to find nice layouts and get inspiration for layouts, and of course you can move stuff around and do it yourself. But yeah, that would be my suggestion for the perfect tabletop wargaming terrain. Thanks for watching, and if you have questions or inspiration for me what I should do next, let me know.